about the topic of my presentation. So this is pretty much, or what I'll be presenting today is a snippet of what ultimately is going to be my dissertation. And of course, I'm looking at, again, race and transportation planning in post-war Atlanta using the time frame 1944 to 1979. So I'll read some stuff from the presentation and just go along as I have it laid out. During the mid-20th century, Atlanta city leaders realized that the characteristics of racial harmony serve as catalysts for economic growth and ensured the business interests of those companies and investors foreign to the traditions and cultural norms of the South. Already engaged in planning and growth management as a result of the economic upsurge, federal advances, and migration sparked by the Second World War, the city leaders mapped out the emerging infrastructure with great emphasis on mobility and transportation planning while holding fast to the traditions of segregation. Post-war transportation planning in Atlanta is exemplary in showcasing the balance of power in the city. As the city leaders began to reflect the population, that is, as more African Americans were able to be elected and appointed to positions in leadership, the decisions reflecting transportation planning and planning in general began to move towards a more biracial leadership and cooperation. However, this research will argue that at the advent of planning the emerging transportation systems and in the years to follow, transportation reflected a city under the occupation of the iron fist of white supremacy and segregation, despite seeking to portray itself as a city too busy to hate. As the city of Atlanta moved towards more aggressive measures in transportation planning during the 1940s, forward progression in most cases failed to comprehensively address the voices and concerns of its growing African American populace or seek their representation, usually placing them in insignificant roles, and consequently a significant portion of the early planned transportation planning in Atlanta is going to reflect that, not in the interest of African Americans. So, of course, my goal is to give voice to the African Americans who, for the most part, were placed in insignificant roles. And I also, or what this particular presentation will do, I have gone through the Atlanta Daily World and other writings of African Americans, and pretty much it's almost like I'm giving their response to all the transportation planning that's taking place. So I begin this presentation or this movie with looking all the way back at the year 1917. So in 1917, Great Fire on the east side of Atlanta literally burns 40% of the old Fourth Ward. And by this time, the old Fourth Ward had become or had a significant African American population, or the African American population on this side of town was growing as a result of the which of course forces a lot of the population that could move about the city. They moved out, literally leaving that area for the most part for African Americans to begin to move in. So in 1917, after this Great Fire, or and according to this map, and this is just me on top of a Google map, this line or this particular border denotes this proposed Grand Boulevard that city planners proposed in 1917. Now I want you to keep this map in mind. The Grand Boulevard would run parallel or run along Hilliard Street to North Avenue, and at the intersection with Houston Street, which is now John Wesley Dobbs. And of course, a lot of these streets are familiar because we traverse this terrain daily. But at the intersection of Hilliard Street and John Wesley Dobbs, or Houston Street, this would pretty much be this interchange would serve as the demarcation. The area south of Houston, or the Soho region of Atlanta, would become the region that would with this Grand Boulevard, become a region in which African Americans would be, or literally this would become a Negro expansion area, or an area specifically for African Americans. So keep this map in mind. Of course, you see Auburn Avenue would literally run directly through the middle of this particular section. So racial zoning represents only one mechanism used in the planning of Atlanta along racial lines. In a study on race and shaping Atlanta, historian Ron Bader, between Ron Bader, Kenny Cruz, those urban historians that focus on Atlanta, a lot of my research stems from things that I've read that they've already done, or I go deeper into exactly what they're talking about. But Ron Bayer asserts that although highways and roads were built or were to be built for the purposes of easing traffic flow around the city and subsequently furthering commercial activity and neighborhood development, they were conceived with ulterior motives. He adds that wherever a highway or road system could possibly serve a racial function, it was literally, or that was kept in mind as these things came about. So keep in mind this proposed Grand Boulevard as I move through this presentation. So the Auburn Avenue District, of course, this area is starting to seem, or in modern times, Auburn Avenue is literally, I like to call it, or Georgia State is literally closing in on Auburn Avenue because, of course, the dorms that have been built down Peachtree and all the development, or Piedmont, all the development down Piedmont and in the Edgewood region, a lot of this is encroaching on the historic African American core. You see, and of course, from this picture, we have like the Atlanta Daily World, which was the major black publication in the city of Atlanta. Big Bethel AME, which whenever you're on the downtown connected, you'll see this steeple that has a sign that says Jesus Saves. Or the Oddfellows building, which was pretty much the center or the auditorium for blacks in Atlanta before or during the period of segregation. Also, you have buildings like the life insurance building and just a whole bunch of other historic African-American businesses, or the commercial center of black Atlanta. So Auburn Avenue becomes the area, or it becomes the commercial center for black Atlanta during this period of segregation. And this particular area is going to be, it lies directly in the center of all the issues of transportation planning, especially with getting the highways to downtown Atlanta. So fast forwarding to the year 1944. 1944, as victory or VE Day and D-Day and all these different victorious events are coming about at the end of World War II, most cities in America began planning for this great migration or this great growth that comes about afterwards, and Atlanta is no stranger. So in 1944, city leaders contracted this group, the H.W. Lochner Group, to create a highway and transportation plan. This is literally, or the Lochner Plan as it becomes known, becomes the basis of my research. This, like a lot of this, or a lot of the information that I have grows out of this Lochner Plan. The Lochner Plan was drafted beginning in 1944, and in this transportation plan, the creators of the plan, they state that there is every indication that Atlanta is approaching a period of great growth and prosperity. Improved highway and transit facilities are essential if the community is to capitalize on its natural assets. Failure to take prompt action would not only retard growth, but add to the overall cost of capital improvement. So immediately, the city of Atlanta begins to, or the city of Atlanta invests in that the Lochner Plan lays out for them. So on this particular map, or this map, of course, comes from the Lochner Plan. And the red lines that you see is the Lochner's proposal for what will become the federal highway system. Historically, Atlanta began as the terminus of two major rail lines. So naturally, transportation was critical to the birth of Atlanta, and it's going to be critical to the growth of Atlanta. So 6 highways have been planned to come to Atlanta. One from Augusta, Greenville, Chattanooga, Birmingham, Montgomery, and Macon in the south. And of course, we know these as being Interstate 20, 75, and 85. So this is the Lochner Plan. The Lochner Plan calls for the downtown connector to literally come through downtown and curve around the Capitol, which it does. And of course, it calls for this east-west expressway, which we know that to be I-20. And of course, the next map literally shows how it actually came into play. Now, very similar in the original outline, but of course, once you get into the downtown region, a lot of those, it was taken into consideration, but you can tell where the politics came into play with the actual alignment of it. So the area in particular that, again, we're looking at is that Auburn Avenue, or right at Auburn Avenue in the old 4th Ward. And of course, this is just a closer view of that which the Lochner Plan called for. So the Lochner Plan in the map of, as we know, as the Grady curve, or the curve of the downtown connector. The Lochner plan literally called for the downtown connector to curve around the state capitol and come and literally chart right through Cortland and Piedmont. So everything that the Student Rec Center, the Dalbert Hall, everything in that block between Cortland and Piedmont was literally slated to be part of this downtown connector. So again, this is the Lochner's proposal of it. And of course, see Cortland and Piedmont, Houston Street again, Auburn Avenue, right in the middle of that block between Houston and Auburn Avenue, literally the powerhouse of Auburn Avenue, Atlanta Life Insurance, the Atlanta Daily World, all of these businesses lie in that particular block. So the Lochner report called for that. Then, of course, what the city of Atlanta does is, from the point that the Lochner report is released in 1946, it then puts together what's known as the Metropolitan Planning Commission, which of course now we know it as the Atlanta Regional Commission. But the Metropolitan Planning Commission was created, again, with the goal of coming up with Atlanta's version, or taking that of the Lochner report into account and creating a serious plan for the city of Atlanta, or creating a final plan for the city of Atlanta. And in doing so, there were many issues that the African American community took up with the Metropolitan Planning Commission. One, in the fact that there was not one African American appointed to that particular board. Instead, Mayor William B. Hartsfield created an advisory board of the top African American leaders, who again served as junior partners, but not as official members of the Metropolitan Planning Commission. So basically what I did, or my goal was I was thinking along the lines of the Stop the Freeway movements with Freedom Parkway and a lot of other success that against transportation planning in the city of Atlanta. And I wanted to know if this had happened in the African American community when the downtown connector was happening, or when the East-West Freeway was being planned. So basically that's what I'm trying to develop out of this particular, or out of looking at it from this aspect. So I went directly to the Atlanta Daily World, which of course it is and was the top black newspaper in the city of Atlanta. And boy, did I find a whole bunch of opinions, articles, a whole bunch of articles basically talking about the evils or the issues of urban renewal, which highways planning was associated with urban renewal, and it's linked directly in with public housing, and it's linked directly in with this up ahead plan, which is what the Metropolitan Planning Commission created. They create the up ahead plan. So the up ahead plan created by the Metropolitan Planning Commission is the plan that that is supposed to move the metropolitan region up ahead. So the up ahead plan was released in 1952. And the 1952 transportation plan embodied much of what had been set forth in the Lochner report. The goals of the up ahead plan reflected the need to coordinate growth and the provision of public infrastructure. City officials recognized that transportation was essential to the growth of Atlanta. Nevertheless, because Up Ahead was created during this period of segregation, then guess what? Up Ahead clearly exhibited everything, or it listed regions of Negro expansion. It listed regions of dilapidated houses, regions that highways could be built through. And all of these places that were listed as dilapidated housing, literally all of these places were pretty much the African American neighborhoods that encircled the downtown area, or encircled the city of Atlanta. So of course, after this Up Ahead plan comes out, then of course the African Americans take to the newspaper, literally voicing their opinions about this Up Ahead plan. So some of the black response to the Up Ahead plan, there was so much, but in particular, it says residents of the Auburn Avenue district denoted the Up Ahead plan as such a bold insult so evil in intent, so unreasonable and unfair to blacks that it leaves me speechless. Because of its harsh implications for the relocation of Auburn Avenue Business District and its other patrons to other areas zoned for black expansion, these were the sentiments that came out of the Atlanta Daily World. One writer says, "We cannot see the need of blueprinting segregation for the future. We believe that in 1980, when metropolitan Atlanta's population reaches the predicted million mark, racial attitudes will be so healthy that we will have to dig deep into our history recorded in our newspaper files to learn that once upon a time there lived in this metropolis persons and groups who were known as peddlers of prejudice and passion, vendors of venom and verbosity, and dealers in deceit and defamation," rallied one black leader. So it was apparent that the African Americans who would be affected by the Upper Head Plan were not so excited about this Upper Head Plan. And then, of course, finally, another Atlanta Daily World article entitled "The People Must Wake Up" was a rousing call of action for the Auburn Avenue community because, of course, these urban renewal programs would definitely would have the greatest effect on their lives. So in this article entitled "The People Must Wake Up," the entire black community had better wake up if the present trend of forcing displaced persons out of the eastern portion of the city continues. The churches and the businesses in the Auburn Avenue district will die on the vine. So overall, in the end, the interstate highway of the downtown connector tore through the Auburn Avenue district and displaced many homes and businesses despite the efforts of community leaders. Floyd Hunter, he's a political scientist who did extensive studies on race and power in the city of Atlanta. He speaks of some small successes in which black leaders, lobbied to keep the freeway from running parallel with Auburn Avenue. Remember, that one never came into play. And they also lobbied to have, instead of the freeway coming between Portland and Piedmont, the freeway actually fell between Bell and 4th Street because, of course, Atlanta Live, the Atlanta Daily World, those buildings lie in that particular block. So, nevertheless, the plans for the downtown connector were followed and the Auburn Avenue district was split, cutting off major portions of the hinterlands by highway construction. Ron Bayer adds that this area was clearly hurt by being cut off by the highways. He also states that the negative impact on the Auburn Avenue district was in a line of long-standing city policies that ultimately hurt Auburn Avenue. And of course, now or in present times, we see all these issues with gentrification. You see issues in historic preservation. All of these are issues that the Auburn Avenue community has to deal with. So this final map, of course, this is the route of the downtown connector. This is the proposal of the Grand Boulevard in 1917. That's the original layout for the downtown connector by the Lochner plan. This is that border of Hilliard Street that was supposed to create this Soho region for African Americans, and this, of course, would be the route of the East-West Freeway. And I asked the question, does this not seem like, or did, in some cases, did the original plans not come into fruition? Because, of course, we have Freedom Parkway at the top that serves as that northern border that Houston Street could have served as, and you definitely have the downtown connector that's separating the black population on the east side from the commerce of the downtown area. So again, this is pretty much what with this presentation or with this research, with this particular chapter in particular, I'm looking at highway construction and how it affects how it affected the downtown connector affected Auburn Avenue. I'm looking at the west side and how Interstate 20 affected the west side communities. And then, of course, this project will go on to looking at the layout of MARTA and how it affected certain communities and why it was laid in such a way. And, of course, these are implications of this research. Historical preservation is probably my biggest one because I'm literally obsessed with this Auburn Avenue community, but also looking at some efforts of gentrification, historical tourism. Of course, the King Center is there, the streetcar project that's taking place. All of this is happening right in this Auburn Avenue district. So that's a snippet of a snippet of a snippet of what I'm working on.